Hey guys, I'm live. This is going to be another, this stream is going to be a little bit shorter and a little bit different. I want to talk about the things that I'm passionate about. I do think that while it may seem odd, I think that our hobbies and what we do at our leisure time, it impacts the culture. It's a reflection of it. And so to me, it's almost as important as like discussing the political because it's all a reflection, right? So um, I'm sorry, my eyes have been bothering me all morning. I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was 15 years old. And as you can see, I'm not white, but the people I played with, the guy who introduced me to it was white. And I hate that I even have to say this shit, but my point is that I've been playing D&D for over 30 years, and this narrative that's been going on lately about how Dungeons and Dragons as a hobby has historically been uninclusive and has had gatekeeping and old guard and all this other garbage. It's just not true. And I find it insulting that people would even try to make the claim that it's true. Um, and that's manifested in a number of ways. There is definitely a tabletop, I guess you could say, like a tabletop gate or D&D gate or something like that. And it's pretty much like as infested as most other hobbies and leisure times are. And of course, because D&D has historically been male dominated, that's a problem, and it should not be allowed. So the thing I want to talk about more specifically, this is a broad problem, and there's plenty of people who, well, I wouldn't even say there haven't been a lot of people making videos about it. There's RPG Pundit, who I've invited on to talk to, and he's really involved, and I like his work quite a bit. And there have been like a handful of other people that have said some things, like, I think Jeremy from the Quartering has mentioned issues in tabletop a few times. I've talked about it. Aiden Paladin's talked about it a little bit, but it hasn't necessarily like taken off as like a thing, right? So I'm going to talk about it regularly, if I'm able, because I hate what's happening to my hobby. And something that I've been into for over 30 years. And the people in it that are involved are some of the most welcoming and the most liberal anywhere. I mean, that's just a fact. But for the left, that's not enough. In fact, it's actually what they don't like. They don't like liberalism. So what sort of spurred this on was there was a review of an early access sort of alpha build or early access build of the game Baldur's Gate 3, which is not a tabletop role-playing game, it's a computer game based on D&D, okay? Some of you guys may have heard of Baldur's Gate. It's a really popular computer game. A lot of people have very fond memories of it. And this review I read from Collider, or I started to read, you might say, oh, well, maybe it's just this one nut job, but I don't think so. I think that it's endemic. I think it's an example of the trend. I'm in a couple of D&D groups that are more like social groups. I lurk most of the time because I'm observing the direction in which the culture is moving, right? I like to keep my eye on like what people are talking about, what they find important about this hobby. The direction things are moving in. They often will show, any new direction that Wizard of the Coast is taking, etc. And I don't exclusively play D&D. I have plenty of other games, and I have older games, and I can get into all of the. There's plenty to talk about with regards to this, but suffice it to say, I want to read this article. So it's entitled Baldur's Gate 3 Review. Can Larian Studios save Dungeons and Dragons from itself? Okay. And the guy goes in. I'm not going to read everything because he starts off by saying, it's buggy, it crashes, it's got its technical issues. But again, the game's not going to be coming out for at least another year. So they're going to be working on this stuff and adding to it and so on as development continues. So if there's any complaints you have about, say, like, playable races being missing or classes being missing or whatever, it's fine to point it out, but it's probably best to just wait until you get closer to like an end product. But he says, the author, Austin Jones, he says, I'm a big fan of RPGs. They're my favorite type of video game by far. I love getting caught in winding dialogue, evolving my character across a lengthy journey, and on subsequent replays, exploring previously unexplored venues and finding secrets I may have missed. The promise of an exclusive, unique adventure that you craft yourself is enticing. Baldur's Gate 3 promises a lot coming on the heels of Divinity Original Sin 2, Larian's crowning achievement and arguably the best CRPG made to date. Never played a Divinity Original Sin 2. I do remember, though, when they were developing Divinity Original Sin 1, I think they had to change the artwork because the female was a little too sexy, and there were a bunch of complaints. I guess they forgot about that, or because they got them to change it, all is forgiven temporarily. Anyway, over the past 2 weeks, I've played through what the game has to offer in its current state once, and I'm working my way through a second run to see how it stacks up. So how is Baldur's Gate 3? Well, it's hard to appraise entirely the way it is now. There are things that are noticeably missing that I expect to be filled in as time goes on. Larian has already stated the full game won't be released until it's been in early access for at least a year, and after that, you won't even be able to import your save from early access versions into the final game. This seems to indicate some major changes coming over the coming months. Larian has already been great about working with player feedback and seem dedicated to delivering the game because they know how much the series means to RPG fans. They've also proven to have quite the sense of humor about it. All right. So anyway, that's just a little bit of that. So, like I said before, in case I didn't mention it, Baldur's Gate 3 is a Dungeons and Dragons game. So people who are D&D fans are going to be the ones that are most interested. And then there are people who are interested in the previous Baldur's Gate games, and maybe they weren't into D&D, but they were just into tabletop, or I'm sorry, they were just into computer role-playing games and found that was a really good one. So this guy continues in another section where he says, Larian Studios can't save Dungeons and Dragons from sucking. And then he says this, I've been actively playing tabletop RPGs for 3 years, and Dungeons and Dragons is easily the worst game I've played. It's meticulous to a fault and difficult to learn, requires half a fortune in books, figures, and other materials, and has long had a problem with racial essentialism. I didn't think I would be able to stomach a game based on D&D systems again after being spoiled by wonderful fiction-focused games like Dungeon World and Blades in the Dark, but Larian Studios gave me hope. This was the developer behind Divinity Original Sin 2, one of the most approachable CRPGs ever made. Okay, so I gotta unpack a few things here. If you hate Dungeons and Dragons, why are you writing about a Dungeons and Dragons computer role-playing game? And I think that this sort of exposes a few things. First of all, D&D is meticulous to a fault. If he's been playing for 3 years, he's probably been playing the newest version of it, which is 5th edition. 5th edition D&D is probably the easiest one to get into. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of meticulousness to it. It's actually really kind of oversimplified, I think. I mean, in some ways. Difficult to learn suggests that I don't know what this guy's looking for. Like D&D is really easy to get into. I don't get that. It seems like does this person even like tabletop role playing games at all? Because I mean, if you don't, that's okay. But you can't come in, and this is something that I've actually talked about this for years and years and years with when it comes to video game reviews. For some reason, video game websites will put people on to review games that are part of long-standing franchises, and the people who are reviewing them are people who hate those franchises, or they can't understand the fandom around it at all. Now, I mean, write whatever you want, but like, I guess I'm getting to what 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 really bothers me about this is like where it's sort of what it says about the hobby itself in like a larger sense. But going back to what my older point, when I think there were these Dragon Ball Z fighting games on the PlayStation 2 and perhaps on the Xbox as well. It was called Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi, I think. Some of you guys may know about them. It's kind of old school. And I'm not even a huge Dragon Ball Z fan, really. I mean, it's all right, right? If there's a game made on it and it's done well, then I'll play it. I know a lot of the lore for Dragon Ball, but I'm not one of those people who watched every episode, and like became like a big but can he beat Goku fanboy? Like I never did that, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and the games were really good. But I think it was IGN. It might not be, but I think it was IGN. They had a guy review Dragon Ball, and he hated Dragon Ball. Like they had a guy review it who hated it. Now you don't want to put a fanboy on there because they're going to give it a high score no matter what, even if the game has flaws. But you don't want to put someone on there who just doesn't like it either because they're gonna knock it down. They're gonna knock it down for no reason just because they're not fans, right? So it's like it didn't serve them well. What you want to get is somebody who, they're aware of the product or like what the franchise is or what the source material is. They're not a crazy fanboy, and they're going to be objective in terms of like determining what works and what doesn't work. Okay. So first, you get a guy who doesn't like D&D, but he likes Divinity: Original Sin 2. Okay, and there's that. Then this person complains about how hard D&D is to get into. Again, let me point out what's wrong with this, okay? Meticulous to a fault is a lie. Unless you're playing like Gary Gygax's original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which is extremely detailed and goes into crazy detail on stuff. That's not true. And by the way, as someone who's been playing D&D since the late 80s, nobody used every single rule from Advanced D&D. Nobody did. It was just too much there. It doesn't require half a fortune in books, especially now that we live in a world where you can get PDFs and you can find a lot of the rules online. There are people who play and spend no money, so that's not true either. And even if you do buy the books, you as a player, you only need the player's handbook, which is like $30. Figures and other materials. You don't need figures to play D&D. And I don't know what other material means except for dice. But that's not the important part. The important part is, he says, it has long had a problem with racial essentialism. And that is the thing that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to open this in a new tab to see what he means by racial essentialism. Just waiting for this thing to open. Let me look at your comments. My tablet's going really slow today. Never touched eroded. Pretty sure there's a debuff for having a cold in AD&D. Yeah. Yeah, AD&D was like, Gary Gygax really spurred out on that one. All right. We used to use coins and poker chips as minis. Yeah, it's almost like it just sounds like somebody complaining about how much they have access to. Okay, so yeah, he says longstanding problem with racial essentialism, and that links to a Polygon article entitled "Wizards of the Coast is addressing racist stereotypes in Dungeons and Dragons, changes to the Drow and Orcs, and more diverse hiring." More diverse hiring. They're gonna kill this hobby, man. Like, imagine thinking that fictional races in magical fantasy worlds represent real people and they represent them poorly with stereotypes. Can you imagine? But I know that there is actually more to it than that. So, but anyway, he said, I didn't think I would be able to stomach a game based on D&D systems again after being spoiled by wonderful fiction-based games like Dungeon World and Blades in the Dark, right? In Original Sin 2, you aren't confined by your race or even the class you start as. Over time, you are able to diversify your character however you want. Instead of gatekeeping abilities behind arbitrary backgrounds you picked at the start of the game, you're allowed to learn any of the skills from the game's 10 schools at any time, provided you level a point in that tree. Upon each level up, you get a point to distribute freely, and only the most exceptional of abilities require more than 3 in a particular school to use. Okay, so basically he's talking about the mechanics. So in Dungeons and Dragons, when you make a character, traditionally, because remember, D&D was a tabletop game before it was a computer game, and it was a group experience, right? It was a social group experience. You had 4 to 6 players and 1 dungeon master. The dungeon master acted as a rules referee. He also built the world. He essentially responds to the players' actions. The players, all of them playing a role, they form a team of heroes, a band, a fellowship, whatever you want to call it, and they go on adventures. It's just meant to be fun, okay? That's all there is to it. You make a character, you join with your friends, and you go on adventures. Okay? And in order to make the game enjoyable for those players, the thing that really makes D&D attractive is that every character has a certain set of skills. Okay? Skills, abilities, talents, whatever. And it makes them unique. Not only in terms of maybe their archetype and their appearance, but in terms of their ability to contribute, to be a part of this team. So, like, I'm currently, I'm in a game that I had run, as an example. I had a wizard, a ranger, a paladin, a barbarian, and a thief or a rogue, right? And they all had their things that they did differently. Wizards cast spells, and the spells can alter reality, and they can use them for crowd control, they can use them to do big damage to single targets, etc., whatever, right? Usually it's crowd control, but they have limited use of their magic, etc. Then, barbarians, they are fighters, but they play differently from paladins, and paladins play differently from rangers. And when you throw in like the racial stuff, like the paladin was a half-orc, and the barbarian was human, and the ranger was a tiefling, then they have it basically like adds a little bit more uniqueness, and everyone is like enjoying playing that role. Is it restrictive? I don't see it that way. But this author does. This is what they're doing, is they're complaining about the fact that you are confined to a race and class, and that abilities are gate kept behind basically classes and levels and races, right? And they're complaining that they don't have access to everything and they can't build the character however they want, no matter what. And I think that this is a complaint that I've been seeing more and more from people in the mainstream tabletop community itself. And I think the reason for that is they don't want D&D to be D&D. Like when this guy says D&D is the worst game I've ever played, I think that I think what he's saying is it's not that it's mechanically bad because it's fine. It's not like the best, but it functions for what it needs to do. It works fine. He doesn't like that it doesn't give him the absolute freedom that a lot of other tabletop games do, like these sort of story. There are there's like this new, not new because it's been going on for about at least 20 years now, but D&D is unique because it was always heavy in the tactical department of how like you resolve conflict, right? But there's been like this sort of uh, emergence, and it's become really the mainstream of storytelling type games where there is still dice or some other random, value generating mechanic. Usually it's dice, but there's a they may have like a value generating mechanic to resolve situations where the success or failure is a possibility, where there's risk, right? And that normally means you have to roll dice to figure out if you pull it off. The But those games also tend to have a heavier focus on telling stories as opposed to games where they're not necessary. It's not that D&D doesn't have the ability to tell stories, but it's more like the mechanics for the storytelling aren't built into the mechanics of the game itself. There have been attempts to try to make that work and square that circle. I don't think it's necessary. I think that players can role play without involving dice. I mean, you could do it for, again, if you want to see if you lied successfully to someone or whatever. I can understand that. But there are mechanics, like I've tried Storyteller, which is basically the system that created Vampire the Masquerade. I believe that Vampire the Masquerade was the beginning of this SJW problem in tabletop because it was made with that kind of like story focused gaming in mind, whereas Dungeons and Dragons was a lot more sort of pulpy and like, oh, go into the mummy's tomb and you go in there and there's traps and there's monsters and there's treasure and you just play through it. And you can have a story for it, but it's not necessary because maybe your players are just adrenaline junkies and treasure seekers and fortune seekers, whatever, and they just want to do it because they do. That doesn't make them murder hobos. I think that that's another issue, but maybe I talk about that another time. There is elitism, is what I'm getting at. There's elitism in tabletop gaming, and the elitism comes from people who believe that role-playing games should only be about telling stories. They should minimally be about combat. In fact, a lot of people, they think that combat is like, if you get into combat, you've somehow failed as a role-playing, as a gamer, and that players should have absolute freedom to make whatever they want with absolutely no limitations. Because I've noticed that there's a lot of people who are in these like D&D groups, and they're trying. They're so obsessed with the exotic and the novel that they have made the most basic race in D&D, which is the human, like they've made it absolutely rare. Like no one makes them. Everyone's making, they're talking about Goliaths and Warforged and these like, not even like the normal exotic races like elves and dwarves and halflings. They don't even make that. They're making like elephant people and tabaxi and it's because there is a problem with people. They want to be so original. They want to wow everyone with their ideas. And a lot of that is where this, like, I need to have absolute freedom. I need to have access to everything. And at the same time, I'm going to try to figure out how everything that exists in this fantasy world somehow represents real life. Because I want it to represent real life for me, is what they would say, right? So this racial essentialism thing, this comment, it's actually not a fringe idea. It's actually a growing mainstream sentiment that I'm seeing in a lot of these role-playing hobby communities, where people want to be, and they're actually like stripping all of the color and flavor out of the game world by doing this. And they say, oh, I want to be an orc, but I want to be a smart orc. Well, first of all, being an orc is already rare because you're not supposed to see them often. Like, it loses its novelty if everyone's doing it, but whatever. Then you want to be like the one that's not like any other. You just want to be really smart. And when people say, well, I'm sorry, but the best you can do is this because this is the nature of the creature, then they say, oh, that's racial determinism, that's biological determinism, that shouldn't be allowed, right? Because remember, these people believe that there is no such thing as biology, and everything is socially constructed, even in a fantasy world. In fact, they believe that in a fantasy world, it's even more acceptable to call it socially constructed because it's literally made up, right? So there shouldn't be any rules. Everything should just be like completely thrown out. And some people have said that, like, it's also, because I just saw a comment about being a good drow. Some people have said that it's also the fault of Dritz Duerden, who was basically like the drow that was good, that left, the Underdark and joined the heroes and stuff. I don't blame Dritz for that. I think that, you're reading a book, it's fiction, you have the one-off that does that. I don't care if people want to be like the one drow that's good. I don't care about that. But is it a bit of a cliche? Yeah, I think so. But any of these sort of edgelordy characters are pretty cliche. But that's the thing, though. I'm not going to engage in that kind of judgment because we're just playing a game. Some people are just going to be archetypes. They're just going to be cliche. Like in there's a game that my friend is playing in, and there was his wife is, or no, I'm sorry, it's not his wife, his girlfriend. She's playing D&D for the first time, and because she doesn't have any experience with it, she made an elven archer, basically like an elven ranger with a bow. Okay, and she said, well, I don't want to come across as too basic and stereotypical, but it's like, so what? Who cares? I don't care. Like, just, you're going to do that the first time, and then maybe the next time you'll try something else. But when you engage in this sort of like, oh, you're so basic, you're not trying anything new, blah, blah, blah. It's like that. And then the same people who do that are going to accuse people like us of gatekeeping. when that's what they're doing. It's like they're engaging in, like, this is how you should be doing this, right? But anyway. I want to go back to this bit about races. So when he complains about not being able to do whatever he wants and have access to everything, he's literally arguing against the spirit of what D&D is. So that tells you, right, right off the bat, he doesn't like this. He doesn't like what he's playing in a fundamental level. Okay? So he says, Larian Studios couldn't rescue Baldur's Gate 3 from Dungeons & Dragons' most tedious and even problematic trappings. Upon starting the game, seeing that there was no orc option, my typical choice in any high fantasy RPG, because of course he's like, I want to play. Look, orcs were never playable characters. Half orcs were, and orcs were supposed to be monsters. So I don't see how he says my typical choice in any high fantasy RPG, unless in video games they may let you do that. I don't know. But at the table, you have to fight with your DM. I know that there was a book for 5th edition that made orcs a playable race. I'm not against that per se, but you definitely, it's one of those things where you got to ask your DM, like, are orcs allowed in this game? Because maybe the DM says, well, in my world they don't exist, or I have a very specific, I don't know, tone I'm trying to go with. But anyway, I bet this guy plays orcs the virtue signal. I decided, since there was no orc option, I decided to play a tiefling or tiefling. I think it's pronounced tiefling though. I'm informed that tieflings are often very ostracized from society and even lack their own culture because of their heritage. Tieflings are the result of humans having offspring with fiends, which results in a little red devil with black sclera and a pointy tail. This kind of half hearted portrayal of racism does little to enhance my enjoyment of the game or understanding of Faerun. All it does is signal that mixed race people are naturally treated with prejudice or even worse, are somehow demonic in nature. Are you fucking kidding me?
Are white people the fiends?
So a tiefling has a little bit of demonic blood in them. They're not half demons. That's not true. They have like demonic heritage at some point in their genetic lineage. And I can't believe that I read that. Mixed race people are seen as somehow demonic in nature. Okay. The reason why tieflings are treated with prejudice isn't because they are mixed race. It's because they're part demon. And demons scare people. And they look kind of scary, right? Like to a normal person. Like I said, in my D&D group, there was a tiefling in the group. But of course, when you take this attitude, you cannot have fun. And these people are against fun. They are anti-fun. I you know what? I'm gonna be honest with you though. I always kind of disliked tieflings as a race. I thought they were a little bit like it was almost like someone was trying to figure out how to make a race that had like a cool demonic look without going full on like you playing as demons. It's a little bit of it's a little bit of like an edgelord thing. Like I want to be a tiefling. Ooh. And there are celestial versions of tieflings. So like there's a reverse of that called the Aasimar. And the Aasimar is like they have a little bit of angelic blood in them. So the skin is like gold and
What?
you know, they're super attractive and
Is that
yeah.
in D&D?
It's in D&D, yeah. Yeah, the Aasimar and the Tiefling were like in third edition they introduced the Tiefling as a race. And they made the Aasimar, which was the opposite of that, as
like
also a race.
An Aasimar Padlet or
Aasimar Paladin was like the
sounds like a
yeah. That was the
match.
absolutely. If you wanted to go straight up like Aasimar Cleric or Aasimar Paladin, Tieflings are a good thematically. They work well with like a warlock or mages or sorcerers. But that's only if you're going to go like that sort of typical route, you know. But yeah, I mean they're viewed that way because again they're part demon. It's not because they're mixed race. This really pisses me off because they try to bring their real life worldviews into fantasy worlds. And the purpose of that is to tear apart the fantasy world itself. What were you gonna say?
Well, I don't know. Like nobody's saying anything racist but him. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, what are you saying? Are white people fiends or are other races fiends or what are you saying?
Well, if orcs represent black people, and he can't play orcs, then maybe tieflings represent like Afro Latinas or something. I don't know. And then oh god, it gets worse. It gets worse. All right, so he's bringing and the thing is that there are other half races, like there are half elves which are mixed race. I hate using that word. But they are a kind of mixed
Why?
race
They
because it's
literally
like
are
their
the
terminology.
combination of two races.
Yeah, I know. But there are half elves, there are half orcs.
You call them
Why
hybrids.
didn't this guy make a half orc? Maybe they don't have them in Baldur's Gate 3 yet. But I mean, there are half orcs, half elves, tieflings, Aasimar, and there's also a race. It's probably not going to be in here, but they're called the Genasi, and the Genasi are like they have a little bit of elemental blood in them, so they're like part genie in a way. I like that. They're pretty cool. So like there's like air genasi, earth genasi, fire genasi, and water genasi. But there's plenty of like half breed races. that you can make. Some people even consider half drow to be like a separate animal too. But of course, this guy thinks, and this is why I don't like it, because it's clearly engineered this way, where he says, "Well, I made a tiefling, and tieflings represent mixed race people because I get to do some virtue signaling on behalf of the people who read my content, and basically say something about how D&D is shit without acknowledging the fact that there is such a thing as a half elf and a half orc, and there are Genasi and there are Aasimar." And that's just like, there are half giants, there are half ogres. I mean, there's plenty of other mixed race playable races. But anyway, Baldur's Gate 3's incomplete roster of races further highlights Dungeons & Dragons' bizarre fascination with mixed race people. Half elves are unable to be accepted fully in human or elven society, and half drow, or dark elves, and we won't even get started on how elves with darker complexions are the evil ones, are unwanted underground with fellow drow and are seen as dastardly villains by all other races. Why is this brand of mixed race diaspora necessary in the game? Why are you bringing it into the game? See, the purpose of, I mean, like, half-breed races, I think that they mostly existed not even as a storytelling tool or a role-playing tool per se, but it was almost like a way for a player character to get some advantages of one race and some of the advantages of the other race, like in a mechanical sense, right? So like, if you didn't want to be a full-on elf because you didn't like the when they used to have like penalties to your stats, you could make a half elf and you would get some of the stuff that elves get, like the night infravision, which is like a low light vision, so you can see in the dark, and some of the bonuses, but you wouldn't get like the severe penalties, right? To balance it out. And I think a lot of people when they made half-breed characters like half-elves, that was the reason for it. It was a mechanical thing. But of course, this guy can't see anything outside of the, socio-political, and so he has to like inject this into the game. Now, why were dark elves the evil elf race? Well, they were driven underground and their skin turned black because they weren't in the sun anymore. Now, does that make sense? Like, is there science to back up that would happen? No, but that's not important. This is a fantasy game. It's got nothing to do with actual race. So are we saying that drow are also black people along with orcs? Like, I hate that I'm even having this conversation. These people are really messed up. Why would I want to engage in a fantasy world where the same type of racism we see every day in the real world bubbles to the surface again and again and is never dealt with meaningfully? This person needs to like stop trying to like get involved with hobbies. Just stop it. You can't enjoy yourself. You just can't. You're like ideologically possessed, and everything you look at, you just find problems with it. This is sad. You won't find remarkable combat here. In fact, okay, I don't really care about that. Dialogue is where the fun is. I don't care. This is another thing right here, this elitism. So, I will read his thing about dialogue, because this is one thing I've noticed, is that like this sort of elitism that I've seen cropping up in tabletop gaming groups, and I think it is a product of the kind of what's that thing, Critical Role, like basically this stuff going mainstream. I think that people see that and they think that is tabletop gaming, and that's what it should be, and they sort of like elevate that shit. And I bet, I don't know, but I bet the Critical Role probably has a lot to do with it. Anyway, he says dialogue is where the real fun is, though the writing is occasionally hokey. The way Larian incorporates ability checks is clever and satisfying. In D&D, your DM might ask you to pass an ability check before you're able to do something you want to do. It might be something like intimidating a crime boss, Doing something like that is pretty hard, so they might set the DC to 15. Actually, 15 is considered average. You can then roll a d20 die, and if your roll supplemented by a modifier is higher than the difficulty class, you're successful. If you fail, your DM gets to make a move against you. That means it won't necessarily play out as you failed, come back later, but you'll have to deal with some consequences for failure. He probably hates that too, right? Failure in tabletop should always be interesting. When I DM, holy shit, this guy DMs, I would stay far away from people like this. I subconsciously always want the players to succeed. If just because I know how things will play out if I do, well then you're a terrible DM. A DM can want a story to go in a certain direction, but has to be ready to adapt to anything the players do because they will always do something you don't expect. Making failure fun requires a little more brain power. The only problem is situations aren't always interesting. I want to see if there's anything else about this. He talks about. Oh yeah, okay. Let's get in. He's gonna go back to race. Let's go back to race for a second. Instead of getting meticulously manipulate your character's cheekbones as in Skyrim or Black Desert Online, Larian claims to have scanned, quote, over 40 people of different ages and ethnicity for the game. This means that you'll only be able to pick from a handful of faces for each race, but each one is lifelike in a way that can be hard to capture in a more robust character creator. The game also has a lovely collection of skin tone and hair options. There's a checkbox that you can tick to see the full range of color options that aren't necessarily lore adherent, so you can go absolutely wild if you want to. You want to be a purple elf with green hair? Go right ahead. Jesus Christ, don't. And again, he likes that because it essentially just means that there is no structure. Let's go to the stuff. If you want to find out what he doesn't like, you can just go, like, that's usually where the woke garbage is at. So, as Ash Paris points it out, the game is a victory so far for people of color players. Typically, people of color are underserved in RPGs, which include a narrow range of darker skin tones and half-ass hair textures. Parrish does, however, point out that the lack of Asian faces for characters other than elves and tieflings, an odd decision that will hopefully be updated sooner, not a great look to deny Asian players the ability to play as a human who looks like them. Why do people obsess over playing characters that look like them? Don't you want to be not you when you're like putting yourself in the shoes of something else? Isn't like the purpose of playing these games to like put yourself in a different body, just like do something else? I am at the point now where if a person says I can't enjoy this because I can't play something that represents me, I don't want to hear what they have to say on it anymore. I don't care. I have been playing D&D since the late 80s. There have never been Latinos in D&D, and I don't care. I don't. I enjoy Lord of the Rings. I enjoy plenty of fantasy content, Dragon Slayer, Willow, no Hispanics. I managed to survive that somehow. I cannot, for the life of me, understand. I've even played games where you can play as Latinos, like, Deadlands, which basically is like a Wild West game. I could have made a Latino in that. Or, any number of contemporary games. And I don't do it. And it's not because I have anything against my own people. It's because I'm trying to escape into I'm just trying something else. It's just not on my mind. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not thinking about why can't I make a Latino here? It's just like, I guess I'm just thinking about things in a different way. I don't know what it could be. Maybe these people just can't. It's like, in order to be able to get into tabletop gaming, I think that you have to have a certain imagination and desire to explore these worlds, and just like any world, in a way that you can't do in the regular world. Like, you just really want to just really get into it, right? And these people can't do it. I think that when I hear that, all I can think of, like, some guy saying, well, it's not a good look that, like, I can't play that many Asian faces, or any Asian faces, if they're not elves. What does that say about elves, I guess? Well, I mean, some elves get an intelligence bonus, so that they must represent us. I don't know. Elves are good at math, I guess. I mean, but when you see the world in that way, it just says so much about you and how shallow and narcissistic you are. It's like, it has to be about me. No, it's not about you, man. I can't. It's just amazing. All right, I'm going to go back to this. Most disappointingly, you're completely unable to alter the body type of your character. This means no matter what, you'll be playing as a thin person, unless you're playing as a dwarf. I don't consider this an optional addition to the game's final build. I consider it completely essential. What kind of message are you sending to your players when your cool fantasy adventure party is only populated by underwear models? Well, if you're going to be like marching long distances and climbing walls and swinging from ropes and engaging in athletic behavior, then you're probably going to be fit. Even if there's just a few preset options, I'd like to see some fuller figured options soon. Holy crap! Get out of my hobby. Fans of Dungeons & Dragons might be disappointed to find a rather scant selection of available classes. Yeah, I know, but it's a year away, so... All right, so let me just skip to, I think we're at the end here. He says, I'm more so hoping for more race options. It'd be a crime not to include half-orcs and dragonborn, two of the core races from the 5e Player's Handbook that are missing. But my pipe dream remains as playable Arachra and Yuan-Ti. I'm desperately missing the lizards in Divinity of Sin 2. Yeah, Arachra and Yuan-Ti are monsters. It was a mistake to give people so much freedom. They get spoiled on it. Just immediately spoiled on it. I'm sure the half-orcs when Dragonborn will be added in later, though. I wouldn't worry about that. But this is not like a new thing. Like, I've seen this going on for a while now. I have like some older articles here. Excuse me. There was a article written in 2012. I'm trying to like go to the tab there. Let me look at, and I'm telling you, this stuff, it's spreading throughout the communities like wildfire. Absolutely, Hasbro is going to get to a point where they're going to either end up just like squashing the whole, they're going to sell the product, they're just going to sell the license off, or they're going to fire everybody and start over. And I think what's going to do it is when they do the 6th edition, which they're going to do. They have like a book coming out pretty soon. It's called Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, I believe. And in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, I'm not going to buy it because I'm not supporting Wizards anymore. I mean, I have some of their books because like when 5th edition first came out, I picked up like the basic books for it. But I'm not going to give them any more money. Never again. I have older versions I can play. I have other games I can play. I'm not giving them my money because it's one thing if it's like, fringe cringe in the community that's like talking about this stuff. But that's not the extent of what's happening. It's in Wizards of the Coast. It's in the publishers. And to be fair, plenty of other game developers in tabletop gaming have the same. They're just as bad. They're SJWs through and through. You can look at, I think I did a stream on this a while back, but there was like entries in like the Vampire the Masquerade books about like how, if you have Nazis in your game, you should kick them out because they have to really think about their life. It was just pointless statement. So yeah, it's totally paused. See, modest proposal for increased diversity in D&D. It's as diverse as you want it to be. That's all there is to it. But you see, for these people, even in a game where everyone at the table in their private space, in the privacy of their own home, where they're getting together to play D&D, they cannot stand the fact that these people might be doing whatever they want, and being, you know, I don't know, like doing whatever they want somewhere, right? They can't stand it because they want to control them. They'll tell you, "Oh no, it's what's going on? You got buffering? Is my thing running? My battery is going." Magic the Gathering has some really cool looking sets coming out next year, but I play Arena for free. Wizard of the Coast is trash. Yeah, absolutely. Save or Die. Wizard of the Coast and Disney, same bucket. No more monies from me. Absolutely. Do they remember that Tasha was the secret identity of Tigwilv, the Witch Queen of Perrinland, a bad guy? Yeah, they don't care. She's a female. That's not like the fact that they even named the book Tasha's Cauldron of Everything tells you that they are pandering right off the bat. Because it could have been like Odaluk's, a book on him. It could have been they already did one on Mordenkainen, but they could have done, Bigby's Hand Up. I don't know, but they wanted to make it Tasha, I think, because she's a woman. Well, he says they've agreed terms. We'll see what happens when she gets back from Afghanistan. What? All right. Anyway, if it's running, okay, I'll just YouTube trying to shut you down, homie. I could see it. I tried to date Tasha, couldn't get past her laugh. But that's literally, I think she only has like what, 1 or 2 spells. But anyway, so yeah, the book, Tasha's Book of Everything. So in the book, from what I've heard, they're essentially going to make as much freedom to create characters as possible. Now, that sounds good, but I think it's going to kill the identity of D&D, because there are things that come, like there are expectations that come with the way the mechanics are built, and if you strip all of that away, because people are, and it's mostly like a lot of it comes from a vocal minority that have complained and said, oh, what if I want to make a super strong elf that's like bodybuilder and has like is like ogre strength? Or what if I want to make a really intelligent, ogre that's like a wizard? They're doing that because the players themselves, they have this strange like need to stand out. And I think it's going to sound really mean, but I think it's because in their regular life they don't, and so they want to do it in this fantasy world. And they're asking wizards to oblige that by changing their system. And of course, wizards, because they also believe this on a fundamental level, and in addition, they want to make money. They're willing to make as many books to expand on this as possible. But I think it's going to, and here's the thing, if you try to complain about this, because this is like a tabletop game, right? If you complain about this, or you say, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea, what this community will do is they'll say, well, it's optional, so you don't have to do it, right? You can just not do it at your table, and that's true. You don't have to use any of that shit. But how long is it going to be until the optional stuff becomes the mandate, and the way in which it's always been done becomes the optional stuff? And if it is the optional stuff, well then why would you even buy their products anymore? Like what they're doing is going to flip everything. And I think that people should be really thinking hard about whether or not they should be supporting that, because you're giving in essentially to bullies. There's that meme where you have like a fandom or a hobby or an interest group or whatever, and the people have been there for years and years and years, and for the longest time it wasn't considered mainstream, it wasn't considered cool. It's just like being into video games wasn't even cool, like 20, 30 years ago. I would say like 30 years ago, right? And then you get these people, these woke narcissists, and they come up and they say we want to be a part of that hobby. Now they only show up when the hobby becomes mainstream or when it becomes something that could be mainstream. So once it becomes really popular, and the people that were in it for many many years have like, they basically just enjoyed their little thing and they shared with the people within that community, and they didn't, they probably even kept it a secret. Like they didn't tell people, yeah, I play D&D, right? They just sort of kept that to themselves because it was a bit of it was a fringe thing. It was kind of, you could get picked on for it, you can get bullied for it, because you weren't doing what the cool kids were doing. You weren't out there, I don't know, driving convertibles and surfing and playing football, whatever. You weren't engaging in those other hobbies. You were doing this thing, okay, with your introverted friends. And then it becomes, because you've worked at it, and the people that are in that hobby, they become adults and they start running companies, and they start buying stores, and they start, sort of like getting out into the regular world. And then as it becomes more and more mainstream, these people, the fringe cringe, the narcissists, the social constructivists, they take an interest in your hobby, and they tell you, oh, I want to play that too, but they don't actually want to integrate. They want to control it. And of course, the people in your group, in your little hobby community, they've always been welcoming. They say, sure, come on in. The more the merrier. I mean, I remember when I learned D&D was going mainstream. I was thrilled. I was like, oh yay, more people are going to play. They're going to find out how great this is. Yada yada, right? So you let them in, and then they slowly over time they push you out, and then they take over. And that's in every single interest group. Every time, 100%, it never fails, and that's exactly what's happening right now. Every time, without fail. And the reason is because you don't want to be a gatekeeper. You say, well, they and even for something as open as D&D, like literally people were telling me that the Tasha's book is optional. I'm like, well, if it's optional, then why are you going to buy the book when you can just change the rules? Why don't you do it at your table? Why don't you just house rule what you want to do? But you see, they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. They want to make it the main. They want their standard to be the standard, right? And you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to enjoy it in the way that it was. And it's not even like if they were literally improving on it, that'd be a different animal. So this isn't about like, oh, I hate, progress or whatever. It's not that. Because they're going to essentially make that the way you play. And then so if you go to a convention, if you join like a league or something, their way is going to be the way. And so you're not going to be able to like get out of that. And the only way you could is if you play it the way you want to do it with your friends. But if you do that, then you got to ask yourself, like, why am I giving money to these people that don't want me in their hobby? Why should I? Why don't I just do something else? So consider going into if that's something, because like, look, you guys do whatever you want. I'm guessing that most of you guys don't even play D&D. So if you are sitting here going, why is he talking about this? Like I said in the beginning, I think that the problems we're experiencing politically and the problems we're experiencing culturally are absolutely related. It is one is downstream from the other. So if the culture changes, the politics change. And I personally have a lot of investment, and I care a lot about this particular hobby. And I see what's happening, and I see the writing on the wall, and I know why it's happening, and so I'm trying to stop it. And I know that, and I think part of that is basically like just letting you guys know this is going on. So, and if you are someone who was in a D&D, but you're thinking about no longer supporting Wizards of the Coast, which I'm not going to tell you what to do, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm no longer giving them my money. I would suggest either trying to find older editions or looking into the OSR movement, I guess, OSR community, whatever. The OSR is a group of people who are creating their own content using the original first edition Dungeons and Dragons as a base, and they're building a ton off of it. It's huge. And you can go and you can get into that. So let me look at your comments here. So Hats on John says, what are you going on about, Brian? People can play characters however they want. Yeah, of course they can. When did I say they couldn't? When did I say that they couldn't? I'm not talking about how people play their characters. I'm talking about the way in which the rules are being changed. Let me see. Emma saying, while I like the elements of 5e, I feel like I'm gonna put my glasses on because I can't see shit today. My vision is all fucked up. While I like the elements of 5e, I feel like it was made for players who are afraid of losing. Perfect example of receiving a full heal from a long rest. Yes, absolutely. I've noticed that as a DM, it's notoriously hard to kill players. Not that that's what I'm trying to do, but if there's no sense of real danger, it can make things kind of boring. I'm saying, my Minotaur Barbarian can go from 100 hit points to 1 hit point and recover all of it just by sleeping it off? Bull. Oh, I see what you did there. I guess we need to grassroots everything. Yeah, it seems that way. Zero says, you can, but the damage is reversible and the company loses money and eventually lets the property fail. But you know what? If it does, that's not a big deal because it's not like the D&D license just vanishes. Someone just picks it up and then they just, expand on it. That's all. So for now, eventually books won't exist. They'll update them. Warp reflections. You can just enjoy these and ignore these people then. Well, yeah, I would say I would continue to point out what's happening, but not associate with the hobby anymore. That's all. The problem is, if you want to play a buff elf, you can do that in any version of D&D. It's literally already in the rules. Yeah, but the thing is, there's like a strength cap, and these people they don't want any racial penalties, and they don't want any racial advantages, because you got to understand that this is a left-wing perspective, okay? All human beings, all people are the same. And any differences between people must be a product of historical oppression and class warfare, right? So in a game, they don't want to see differences because then it suggests that this person is better than this person. And so, like, at least they're starting with the races right now. They're starting by saying, well, the elves shouldn't be weaker because why couldn't they just change that, right? Orcs shouldn't be dumb because why couldn't they just, like, get an education and become smarter, right? Because the idea that they are different is racist to them. The idea that there is a difference between people and that everyone isn't identical, right? Not just equal, identical. And so it's going to start with the racial rules, but I can guarantee you that at some point, and they've already started doing this, they're going to eliminate alignments. There will be no such thing as good and evil, lawful or chaos. They're going to destroy the cosmology. They're going to eliminate gods. They've already started doing this thing where they're talking about, like, oh, what if I want to be an atheist cleric, right? Because they don't like the idea of higher beings. And in the fantasy settings, gods and the cosmology of D&D, like the way that the actual multiverse is arranged, is a product of the alignment system, which they hate. They hate the alignment system. They hate the alignment system. They hate the gods. They hate all of that. They don't want any of it to matter, right? So they're going to eliminate it. I promise you, it's going to happen. They're going to make the case for it because they've already started working that way. And so they're ultimately going to eliminate stats altogether. There won't even be stats because stats suggest that people are different. They have strengths and weaknesses. and that shouldn't be allowed. This is why this guy didn't like the idea that there were classes and races to begin with, because it suggests that fighters are good at this thing, wizards are good at this thing, clerics are good at this thing, right? You can't have that. I want to be able to build my guy however I want and just give him everything. That's what they ultimately want. And you think that I'm being hyperbolic, but it's true. I've seen it. Zero says, Warp Reflection, you most definitely can use older rules and just roll with it. Yeah, if you already own the books, go ahead. I'm just saying, if you want to buy them, just consider that you're giving money to the people who hate you and want to destroy your hobby. Let me see. I don't see anything else here. Warp Reflection. He's the soldier. He's the gunner. No, I don't know what that is. I'm going to zoom into the end here. 3.5 for the win? Yeah. 3.5 was a little needlessly convoluted. I like 3.0. Warp Reflection. It's a dangerous world with orcs and magic, etc. Why wouldn't there be deaths? That sounds no fun. Yeah, well. Shaman King says, the idea that there are differences in racial abilities is forbidden. Yeah, you get it. 1400 says, to a degree you can make a strong elf or a smart orc, but they're not going to be as smart as a smart elf, and the elf isn't going to be as strong as a strong orc. I will never be as strong as a strong gorilla. Exactly, BC, that's oppressive. That's what I'm saying. They're going to eliminate that. They hate the gods, so they're your priests. Yeah, they're not traces like no stats, only feelings. Exactly. Hats on, John. Do you have any links for what you're suggesting? Legit curious about what you're talking about. I've mostly played 5e with friends. Well, if you're playing with your friends, you're not going to run into that. But try, like I said, look up that article I told you about Baldur's Gate 3, where the guy talks about why he hates D&D. Look up any, if you're going to be a little bit buried, but you can find them. Join some D&D communities and observe how they talk about this stuff. Okay? It's just like this attitude is like a virus. It gets into people and they start thinking that this is how it should be, right? That they want to eliminate, they will hide it, and whether they know it or not, they will conceal it under a cloak of, oh, I'm just giving people more options. I just want more freedom in character creation, and all of that sounds good, but ultimately it eliminates. It gets to a point where it destroys the identity of the source material. And that's the problem. Like, I'm all for variety. Like, somebody made a comment about the post I made about Tieflings, where I talked about it on Twitter with Aiden Paladin, and she said, she was basically just marveling at the idea that somebody sees like, a part demonic fantasy race, and they just think, oh yeah, that's a mixed race person, that's an Afro-Latina, that's a representation of like, Tim Pool, like the half white, half Korean guy. And I commented that, well, if it's true that Tieflings are like a negative racial stereotype of mixed, race people because they're part demon, then what does Aasimar represent since they're part angel? Like, what are they, like, part white? Like, what is this person doing? Are they just essentially being racist, And someone commented, I forget his name, but he said that if you wanted to accomplish that narrative, that sort of narrative story for a half-breed character, there's a number of other half-breed characters you can make. I'm talking about half orcs, half elves, and so on. And I said, but the purpose of the half-breed races wasn't to give you a whole bunch of like cool story opportunities. It can be, but ultimately it was a mechanical thing. They were just like I said before, people want variety in their character classes and races. Like, that was the thing that made D&D fun. And it is, in a way, something that makes D&D unique from most other role-playing games, because there are a lot of other role-playing games that have races, or they have like, you know, things you can change. But D&D is kind of unique in that every race has mechanical differences, and when you make your character, you might be optimizing, you might just be trying it for flavor, you might actually be going for something that's completely against type just to see how it plays out. But there's no desire for, usually there's no like, oh, I just, you know, I need to represent myself with this half giant. That's just not a thing. I don't think that by and large people do. So, but you can find it everywhere. All right, let me see here. Zereg says, I get the feeling of wanting to do everything. I do not like having a mage with the staff and not being able to engage in close quarters combat. I won't change the rules, it's just how I look at things. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, there are workarounds in the rules. So it's not like D&D is. See, I don't think of D&D as restrictive. This is one of the things that people say. It's restrictive. I don't think it's restrictive. I think that things like races, classes, weapon restrictions or weapon limits or whatever you could say, proficiencies, alignments, these are tools to help you make a more interesting character. They're not restrictions. Think of them as tools. Tim Pool is as white as Elizabeth Warren. Half beanie, half skateboard. The golden rule is that you can change any rule that you do not like. So the rules and setting need to be simple enough to change. They are needlessly complicating everything. This is so the golden rule cannot be easily applied. Yeah. Well, because if you change something, it has like a domino effect. Like maybe a butterfly effect where it has like effect on other things but sometimes you can't see it. And by the way, if a system is fundamentally so broken that you need to apply the golden rule, why are you paying for the system? Why wouldn't you want to be half demon? That sounds cool. Well, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? If that's what you want to do. It really isn't restrictive. It forces choices, and that's not the same thing. Yes. All right. That's why I don't get these SJW types crying about it if you can make your character pretty much anything you want. Mostly. All right. Well, anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I've gone for too long on this, and I probably rambled and repeated myself a lot, but it's fine. It's just a live stream, so who cares? But I just wanted to get that off my chest about Tieflings being mixed race. I think this person is just trying to stoke division in the hobby itself. In general, that's what these people want to do. They just don't they don't want to solve problems. They want to complain. They want to find them and they complain about them. So if you guys like this video, hit like, subscribe. I see that we got 19 likes and 27 people watching. Can you guys do better than that? I appreciate it. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I'm going to get out of here. I got to do a news show later. So just giving my thoughts.